Welcome to Silent Betrayals. Please like this video and subscribe to Silent Betrayals. We are truly grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where you're tuning in from around the world. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. The sound of her phone buzzing broke the quiet of the evening. Sitting on the couch with a beer in hand, I glanced at the glowing screen. Patrick. His name was burned into my memory, always present like a thorn in the corner of my life. But it wasn't just his name that made my heart skip. It was the message preview. A half smile crossed my lips, but the tightness in my chest didn't fade. I reached over and tapped the screen. My hand was steady, but my heart was racing. His message read, "Had a crazy dream about you last night, winking face. You sure you're not missing out?" I swallowed hard. Missing out on what? My wife, my partner, the woman who shared my bed, my business, my life. Hannah was upstairs, probably brushing her teeth or scrolling through social media, as she always did before bed. I took a deep breath, my pulse quickening. This wasn't the first time Patrick had made me uncomfortable. For years, I had tolerated him lingering on the edges of our marriage, laughing with her in ways that felt too personal, texting her at hours that were far too late. I marched upstairs, phone in hand, feeling the weight of years of bottled-up frustration. The bedroom door creaked as I pushed it open. She looked up from her side of the bed, her face fresh and makeup-free, radiating the innocence that had always made me love her. "Care to explain this?" I said, holding out the phone. Her smile faltered. She took the phone, read the text, and rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You know Patrick. He's harmless. That's just his silly sense of humor. Harmless." I stepped closer, my voice sharper. "This isn't humor, Hannah. It's disrespect. Towards you, towards me, towards us." She sighed and placed the phone on the nightstand. "It's Patrick. He doesn't mean anything by it. Doesn't mean anything." My voice rose, and I could feel the tension rolling off me like a storm. "Hannah, this guy's been crossing the line for years. Why do you keep letting him do this?" She didn't answer right away. She stared at me, her jaw tightening as though preparing for a fight. "You know how close we were before," she said. "He's been through a lot, and I don't want to abandon him." "Abandon him?" I said, incredulous. "You're married now, Hannah. To me. I've never made you choose before, but this is the last straw. Either you set boundaries, or I'm done." Her eyes widened at my tone, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in them. She opened her mouth to protest, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She nodded quickly, the fight draining from her. "I'll talk to him," she said softly. But as I walked out of the room, the pit in my stomach remained. The seeds of doubt had already taken root, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. The next morning, the house was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. I sat at the table, staring into my coffee, replaying last night's conversation in my mind. The tension in Hannah's voice lingered like a bad aftertaste. She promised to talk to Patrick, but promises were cheap when made in the heat of an argument. She walked into the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower, her smile too bright, too forced. "Morning," she said, grabbing a mug and pouring herself some coffee. "Morning," I replied, keeping my tone even. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this would be the end of Patrick's interference. But deep down, something felt off. "Are you still upset about last night?" she asked, her voice light, as if trying to brush the tension aside with casual banter. "Should I be?" I asked, meeting her gaze. She hesitated, her hand lingering on the coffee pot. "No," she said finally. "I already texted Patrick this morning. I told him that his jokes weren't appropriate and that he needed to respect our boundaries." I nodded. The words registered, but they didn't fully sink in. The tension eased slightly, but not enough to erase the doubt. We spent the rest of the morning in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. By the time I left for work, I convinced myself to give her the benefit of the doubt. After all, we had built a life together, a business, a home, a partnership. I owed it to us to trust her. As I drove to the office, my mind wandered back to the early days of our relationship. Back then, Patrick was just a name that occasionally came up in conversations, a relic from her past. She spoke about him casually, mentioning their years of history, their ups and downs. I remembered how she had nursed him back to health after his motorcycle accident, dedicating months to his recovery. At the time, I admired her compassion and her unwavering loyalty to those she cared about. But as the years went on, Patrick became a recurring figure, a shadow that loomed over our marriage. There were small moments that should have raised red flags. The way she laughed a little too hard at his jokes, the way she always defended him when I voiced my discomfort, the way she seemed to light up when his name appeared on her phone. I pushed those feelings aside, convincing myself I was overthinking, that I was just being paranoid. But now, with the memory of last night fresh in my mind, I realized those weren't fleeting doubts. They were warnings I had chosen to ignore. Weeks passed, and things seemed to settle down. Hannah was attentive, affectionate. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we had turned a corner. Patrick's name didn't come up in conversation, and her phone was always in plain sight. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, she mentioned she was meeting her friend Danica to help organize her closet. The statement was so out of character that it immediately set off alarm bells. Hannah, who avoided tidying up her own closet, was now offering to help someone else. I didn't argue. I nodded, kissed her on the cheek, and watched her leave, my stomach twisting with unease. The moment the door closed, I reached for my phone. I checked her location, a feature we had agreed to share years ago for convenience. She wasn't at Danica's house. She was across town at an address I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice higher than usual. "Hey," she said, her tone casual but strained. "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "What are you up to?" "Just helping Danica," she said, her hesitation barely noticeable. "Really?" I asked, my voice sharpening. "Because your location says you're across town, not at Danica's." There was silence on the other end of the line, then a shaky laugh. "Oh, Dan moved recently. Didn't I tell you?" "Right," I said, my tone cold. "Say hi to Patrick for me." Before she could respond, I hung up. The next day, I decided to trust my instincts. I knew the address now, the place where she had been the night before. I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew the truth. I left work early, driving across town to the unfamiliar address. Parking a few houses down, I stepped out of the car, my hands trembling as I approached the house. Through the large bay window, I saw them. Hannah was sitting on Patrick's lap, her arms wrapped around his neck, her lips pressed against his. They were so absorbed in each other that they didn't notice me standing there. I pulled out my phone and recorded the scene as my heart shattered into a million pieces. Then I knocked on the window. The sound startled them. Hannah's head snapped toward me, her face going pale. Patrick froze, his arms still around her waist. "Smile for the camera," I said, my voice dripping with venom. Their panic was evident, but I didn't wait for explanations. I turned and walked away, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. As I drove away, a single thought consumed me. This isn't over. The drive back to the office was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The image of Hannah and Patrick burned into my mind, every kiss, every laugh. They shared that behind my back, replaying like a torturous loop. Anger pulsed through my veins, but beneath it all, a deeper, sharper pain lingered. Betrayal. When I walked into the office, my assistant noticed the storm on my face. She wisely said nothing, handing me the stack of files I needed for the day. I went through the motions, meeting with clients, making decisions, but my thoughts weren't there. Hannah called twice. I ignored both. By the time I returned home that evening, her car was in the driveway. My jaw tightened as I parked. Inside, she was pacing the living room, her face pale, her hands nervously wringing. "You've been ignoring my calls," she started, her voice trembling. I dropped my keys on the counter, leveling her with a cold stare. "You think you deserve an answer after today." "It's not what you think," she blurted out, her eyes wide with desperation. "Now what I think." My voice rose, cutting through the room like a blade. "You on his lap, Hannah. His lap. Do you even understand how pathetic that makes me look? How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that. He was upset about something, and I stopped her. "Don't insult me with your excuses. I've put up with this for years, Hannah. Years. Every boundary I set, you ignored. Every doubt I had, you brushed off. And now this." Her sobs grew louder as she sank to her knees, clutching my hand. "I made a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, don't leave me." I yanked my hand away, my voice cold. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been lying to me, sneaking around with him. And now you want me to believe it was a mistake? No, Hannah, you don't get to play the victim." Her cries filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy, not anymore. Over the next few days, I barely spoke to her. I stayed late at the office, crashing on the couch when I couldn't bring myself to go home. I needed space, but more than that, I needed clarity. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting, I sat in my office, staring at the stack of legal documents on my desk. Among them was our business partnership agreement, a document we'd signed when we first launched our company. Flipping through the pages, I found what I was looking for, the morality clause. It was a small section, one I barely glanced at when we drafted it years ago. But now, it felt like a lifeline. The clause explicitly stated that any conduct harmful to the company's reputation could result in the forfeiture of ownership. Infidelity wasn't mentioned directly, but her actions, her betrayal, had compromised our business partnership. The next day, I met with my lawyer. We crafted a formal notification outlining her breach of the agreement. The evidence was damning: photos, videos, and texts that painted a clear picture of her betrayal. When I handed her the document, she stared at it in disbelief. "You're removing me from the business?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "You did this to yourself," I said, my tone devoid of emotion. "You violated our agreement, and I won't let you drag this company down with your lies." Her eyes filled with tears, but there was a flicker of anger beneath them. "You can't just cut me out like this. I helped build this business. You helped build it, but I carried it," I replied coldly. "And now, you'll have nothing." She threw the document on the table, her hands shaking. "You're cruel." "Cruel?" I said, leaning in. "Cruel is what you did to me. What you've been doing to me for years. You think I didn't see it? The way you looked at him, laughed at his jokes, defended him while ignoring me? I trusted you, Hannah. I loved you. And you threw it all away for a man who doesn't even care about you." Her sobs filled the room, but I turned and walked away. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The legal process was swift, and by the end of it, the business was solely mine. Hannah moved out of the house. Her name wasn't on the deed, so she had no claim to it. She stayed with her cousin for a while before moving in with Patrick, but their bliss didn't last long. Through mutual friends, I heard about the cracks in their relationship. Patrick, true to form, began seeing other women. When Hannah confronted him, he laughed in her face. She moved out again, this time with nowhere to go. For the first time in years, I felt free. The business thrived under my leadership, unburdened by the tension that had weighed me down. I started therapy, confronting the anger and pain that lingered. Slowly, I found joy in the small things. Dinners with friends, quiet evenings with a good book, the thrill of rebuilding my life from the ashes. Dating wasn't easy, but it was a reminder that I still had a lot to offer. Each new connection helped me rediscover the parts of myself I'd lost along the way. Months later, I received a message from Hannah. She wanted to meet and talk things through. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Standing in my office that evening, watching the city lights flicker below, I felt a sense of peace. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed me. I was stronger now, wiser. And as for Hannah, she was just a memory, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. This is my life now, I thought, a small smile playing on my lips. And it's mine alone,